Hello and welcome to this next lesson in our topic on transporting plants. In previous lessons, if you're using the lesson booklet that I've given you, we've looked at the following. So we've looked at the structure and function of plant stems. You should be able to answer those learning objectives linked to the specification below. We've looked at water transport in plants, so we've looked at transpiration streams and transpiration from the leaf of a plant. Should be able to answer those learning objectives and follow the specification. Last lesson, we looked at translocation. You should be able to explain what translocation is and all those learning objectives and the specification. And again, if you're using the booklets that I've given you, sent you in class, today we're going to be looking at this one. Lesson 4, plant adaptations to water availability. Okay, so I've converted this into 3 learning objectives. This is based on the specification. This is taken from the OCR specification. You can see directly what you need to know. So the adaptations of plants to water availability. By the end of this lesson, you should be able to give some general adaptations that plants have to overcome limited water availability. You should be able to explain what xerophytes are and their adaptations, and you should be able to explain what Hydra Fights are and their adaptations. So the first thing we're going to say in today's lesson is that plants need a large surface area to volume ratio in order to get enough sunlight and enough carbon dioxide for photosynthesis to happen. Okay, so we can say that plants need a large surface area. We don't spell surface area with a V, do we? Surface area to volume ratio to get enough sunlight and carbon dioxide for photosynthesis. So if you are a large leaf, if you're a plant that has these large leaves, so a leaf that looks like this, I know you're blown away. Why isn't Mr. Abraham an art teacher? And we've got these veins that come through the leaf. What this means is that sunlight is captured by the leaf for photosynthesis, and by having a larger surface area, lots of carbon dioxide can diffuse into the leaf. By having a large leaf, it gives a bigger area across which carbon dioxide can diffuse in. However, this presents a problem because by having a large surface area to volume ratio, these leaves can lose water easily. So at the same time, water is lost from the leaf. Okay, because they have this large surface area to volume ratio, they can get a lot of carbon dioxide, they can get a lot of light, but they also lose a lot of water as a result. So we can say the large surface area to volume ratio also causes the leaf to lose a lot of water by transpiration. Okay, So by having a large leaf, it's able to get the carbon dioxide and light it needs for photosynthesis, but it also loses a lot of water. Now, depending on their surroundings, different plants have different adaptations to either conserve or lose water. Okay, so we can say depending on their surroundings, comma, plants have various adaptations to either lose or conserve water. And this is what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be talking about the different adaptations that plants have to allow them to either keep this water in if there isn't much, or lose this water if there is too much in the environment. Okay? So, let's refresh our screen. Let's send it back to black. And we can start by saying that some plants live in environments with little water. So some plants live in environments with little water, comma, these plants need to conserve water. Need to conserve water. Now, plants that live in areas where there's very little water and they have adaptations for this are known as xerophytes. Xerophyte. That's Xerophyte. Xerophyte. And we can define a xerophyte as such. We can say that they are plants with adaptations. Plants with adaptations that enable them to survive in dry habitats, where water is in short supply in the environment, or in habitats where water is in short supply. Is in short supply. Okay, so a xerophyte is a plant with adaptations that enable them to survive in dry habitats or in habitats where water is in short supply. Now, xerophytes are found both in the desert, so we can just put that they're found in the desert, found in desert, or cold icy conditions where water is frozen, or cold icy conditions it's actually spelled conditions, is it? Conditions where water is frozen. Okay, so xerophytes have adaptations to allow them to live in areas where there's very little water. This can include hot, dry areas such as the desert, or it can include cold, icy areas where the water is frozen. Now, one such plant that comes under the category of xerophyte is what's known as marram grass. And marram grass looks like this, okay? Now, in your specification, it does mention that you need to know about marram grass. Marram grass is a xerophyte, and we're going to talk about some of the adaptations that xerophytes have. These aren't necessarily all found inside marram grass, so you're going to need to do your own research to see which ones specifically apply to marram grass. However, some of them will be found, okay? So we can put xerophyte adaptations, okay? Now, the upper surface of all xerophytes tend to have a thick, waxy cuticle. So they have a thick, waxy cuticle. Now, if you remember back to GCSE, a waxy cuticle is a thick layer found on top of the leaf to prevent transpiration happening. It prevents the evaporation of water from the top of the leaf. So we can just add next to this one, reduces transpiration from the top of the leaf. The next adaptation that we've got written down is sunken stomata. So sunken stomata. Now, what we mean by sunken stomata is that rather than the stomata on the underside of the leaf being found level with the underside of the leaf, they're sunken inside the leaf. What this creates is sort of like a microclimate, okay? If you imagine the bottom of the leaf, if we can just get a green, I will rub this off. So if you imagine a leaf, rather than having its stomata level with the leaf, the stomata are found in these sort of pits, okay? So if this is the stomata in the bottom of the leaf, they're found dipped in. What this creates is a sort of microclimate where there is lots of water, okay? Inside this pit, this microclimate will be very humid. And what it means is that there's no sort of water potential, there's no water potential gradient. Therefore, the water won't leave the leaf and it will stay in the leaf, okay? So for sunken stomata, I will leave that on. We'll just have to make a new slide as we go through these adaptations. We can say that stomata are sunken into pits. I'm not sure if sunken's a word, but we're going to use it. Stomata are sunken into pits, creating a humid microclimate and reducing the water potential inside slash out of the leaf. So the sunken stomata create a humid microclimate, reducing the water potential inside and out of the leaf. Therefore, there will be no movement of water out of the stomata and the leaf will not lose any water, or at least less water. As well as this, xerophytes tend to have fewer stomata. Not only are these stomata sunk, but they have fewer stomata. These fewer stomata reduce transpiration. So reduce transpiration. As well as having fewer stomata, xerophytes tend to have fewer leaves. Fewer leaves. By having fewer leaves, there are less stomata through which water can be lost. So we can say that it reduces the surface area, I'll just put SA, that stands for surface area, across which water is lost. Okay. Now I have got some more xerophyte adaptations I need to talk about, so I am going to have to refresh the screen. If you haven't got all these notes down yet, please pause the video and get them down, because I'm going to refresh the screen now. So if we carry on with, we need black, don't we? Yeah, it's here. If we carry on with what we were saying, if I put our image back up, because I think it just adds some sort of idea to what we're talking about. So again, this is marram grass, which is a xerophyte. The next adaptation that I've got written down that we need to talk about are hairy leaves. Hairy leaves. You'll find that the leaves of a xerophyte have tiny hairs on them, and what they do is they trap water in the air between the hairs. This creates a microclimate, again around the leaf, that is very humid, reducing the water potential gradient. So we can say that tiny hairs trap water vapour around the leaf, creating a humid microclimate So creating a humid microclimate and equaling the water potential gradient, inside and outside the stomata. Inside and outside the stomata. Okay, so if you've got the leaf surface, for example, with these tiny hairs on them, so it's got these tiny hairs on the leaf surface, what it will do is it will trap water molecules between these tiny hairs. This will increase the water potential gradient outside of the stomata. It will make it equal to the inside of the plant, and therefore water is less likely to move out of the stomata. It's in fact more likely to move in. So it reduces the amount of water lost by the plant. A similar adaptation, a similar one that xerophytes use, are curled leaves. If the leaves are curled, it ensures that a microclimate is made inside where the stomata are found. So curled leaves creates a humid microclimate which reduces the water potential gradient and therefore reduces transpiration. Okay, so it says creates a humid microclimate which reduces the water potential gradient and therefore reduces transpiration. Again, if you think of having a leaf and the underside of the leaf curls inwards, so if that's our underside, the leaf is curling inwards like so. So this is, how can I do this? If this is our underside, so the underside of the leaf where the stomata is found is on this pink line. What you'll get is the stomata in here creating this mini microclimate that is very humid, lots of water on the inside, and therefore water isn't really lost from the stomata because there isn't a water potential gradient. Okay. The next one are xerophytes known as succulents. Succulents. Now, succulents are just xerophytes that store water. Okay, so succulents are xerophytes that store water in specialized parenchyma tissue. Parenchyma tissue. In the roots and stem. In the roots / stem. So succulents essentially store water. So they're plants that store water in specialised tissues. Okay. Some xerophytes lose their leaves, so leaf loss. What I mean by this is when water availability becomes low, they lose their leaves, therefore have less transpiration. Because remember, transpiration only happens through the stomata of a plant. So leaf loss, we can say they lose their leaves when water levels are low to reduce transpiration. So by losing their leaves, the plant can't carry out transpiration, or there's less surface area across which transpiration can happen. That's an important point that we haven't written down, but I have mentioned it in previous lessons, is that transpiration only happens at the leaf. Plants don't lose water from anywhere else. Not really, anyway. Okay? The final one that we need to just mention is that xerophytes have root adaptations that maximise the amount of water they absorb. So root adaptations we can say that they have wide or deep roots. So wide / deep roots to maximise water absorption. Okay, so we've said that xerophytes live in either dry or frozen conditions, and that xerophytes are plants with adaptations that enable them to survive in dry habitats or habitats where water is in short supply, such as the Arctic where it's frozen. Examples of adaptations that some xerophytes have: they have this thick waxy cuticle which prevents transpiration from the top of the leaf. They have sunken stomata, which creates a microclimate which is very humid, reducing the water potential gradient, therefore less water is lost from the stomata. They have fewer stomata, therefore there is less surface area across which transpiration can happen. They have fewer leaves, again, so that they have less surface area across which transpiration can happen. They have hairy leaves, and these hairy leaves, which is shown here, trap water vapour in between them. This creates this sort of mini microclimate, therefore there is no water potential gradient. Water cannot be lost from the leaf because there isn't an area that's concentrated and an area that's dilute, it's equal. We've got that they can have curled leaves, again creating this microclimate where water will not be lost. It essentially equals the water potential gradient. We've got succulents, which are xerophytes that store water in specialised parenchyma tissue in the roots and stem. We've got leaf loss. By losing leaves, xerophytes reduce the amount of stomata through which water can be lost through transpiration. And we've got root adaptation. Some roots go very, very deep to get water deep in the ground, and some go very, very shallow but wide to catch any water that hits the ground when it rains, for example. So you should be able to tell me what xerophytes are and some of their adaptations. Let's have a think about Hydra Fights now. Let's have a think about Hydra Fights. So if we refresh our screen, turn it back to black so that it's easier for you to read, get my pen. Now, some plants live in water, okay? So some plants live in an abundance of water, comma, they need to lose water. They need to lose water. Full stop. Now, xerophytes are plants that live in hot conditions or where there's very little water, such as ice, where the water's frozen. Hydrophytes are the opposite. Okay? So hydrophytes are the opposite. A hydrophyte is defined as a plant with adaptations, a plant with adaptations that allow them or enable them to live or to survive in very wet habitats or submerged in water. Okay. Now, Hydra Fights have adaptations that encourage water loss. So Hydra Fights have adaptations to encourage water loss. Okay. An example of a hydrophyte, and this is mentioned in your specification, is a water lily. Okay, and water lilies are plants. Oh, we don't want it that big, do we? Water lilies are plants that live literally on water in ponds. Okay. We can have a think about their adaptations like we did for xerophytes. So hydrophyte, adaptations. The first one is that they have a very thin or no waxy cuticle. So thin / no waxy cuticle. Now this allows water loss from the top of the leaf. So there's no waxy cuticle when you feel the top of these leaves. Water can just simply evaporate from the top of the leaf. So allows water loss from the top of the leaf. So it allows water loss from the top of the leaf. Hydrophytes, in particular water lilies, have stomata on top of the leaf that is always open. So they have stomata on top of the leaf that is always open. Now, by having these stomata always open, it means that water can transpire quite easily. Transpiration happens place and the water leaves the leaf as much as it wants. It's important they're on top of the leaf because if you think about it, on the underside of the leaf it's submerged in water. Therefore, the water wouldn't leave the leaf, okay, because there would be a water potential gradient encouraging the movement of water into the leaf. Now, these plants want to lose water. So we can say that it allows transpiration and we can also say that, or we can put full stop, we can say underside of the leaf is submerged so wouldn't allow water loss. The next adaptation that they tend to have, Hydra Fights that is, that they have weaker stems. Weaker stems. If you think about it, because they're submerged in water, the water simply holds the plant up, whereas if you're not in water, you need a stem to keep the plant held upright. But because they're in water, they don't rely on the stem to do this, the water does it. The buoyancy of the plant holds it up. So we can just put underneath this one, water holds plant upright. So they don't rely on a stem to do this, the water does it for them. They have wide, flat leaves. So wide, flat leaves. These, I'm going to rewrite that because it's terrible. I do apologise about my handwriting today. Wide, flat leaves. This increases the area for light, or the surface area to capture light. So increases the surface area to capture light. They have small roots. Small roots. Again, because the plant is floating in water, it doesn't need roots to absorb water via osmosis or active transport or whatever. The water simply diffuses into the stem. So, not diffuses, sorry, moves via osmosis. So small roots, water is absorbed by the stem directly. That says directly. Final ones. We've got air sacs. Air sacs. Now these air sacs allow the plant to float on water. So they have these air sacs that help the plant float. So by having these air sacs, the water lily can float on top of water without sinking. And finally, and I'm going to struggle to fit all this on, we've got the Parenchyma. The Parenchyma. That's spelled Aerenchyma. Now this is specialised parenchyma which allows the plant to float and provides a pathway for oxygen. Okay, so specialised parenchyma that, it's not how you spell that, is it? That allows floating / movement of oxygen. Now I'm going to run out of space, so I'll explain that a bit more. Because the plant is found floating in water, it's very difficult for it to move oxygen around the plant. Therefore, it has this what's known as an Parenchyma, Aerenchyma, that allows oxygen. It gives it a pathway with very little resistance to move through the plant. So some plants live in an abundance of water. They need to lose water. They have too much water. They have adaptations to allow them to get rid of it. A Hydra Fight is a plant with adaptations that enable them to survive in very wet habitats or submerged in water. These adaptations that they have that encourage water loss include thin or no waxy cuticle, which allows water loss from the top of the leaf. That's an S, by the way. Stomata on top of the leaf, there is always open. This always allows transpiration, and it's on the upper side of the leaf because the underside of the leaf is submerged in water and wouldn't allow transpiration. We've got weaker stems, water that holds the plant upright. They've got wide flat leaves which allow the plant to capture lots of sunlight. They've got small roots. They don't need these big extensive root systems because they're already submerged in water. They don't need it to be absorbed. They have air sacs which allow the plant to float, such as water lilies floating on water. And they have what's known as an Parenchyma, specialised parenchyma that allows the plant to float and the free movement of oxygen with little resistance. So, you should now be able to tell me some general adaptations of plants to overcome limited water availability. You should be able to explain what xerophytes are and how they're adapted to survive in dry conditions. And you should be able to tell me what Hydra Fights are and their adaptations to survive in wet conditions. Should you have any questions about this lesson, please contact me on Google Classrooms below or send me an email directly and I will get back to you as soon as I possibly can. Thank you for listening. I hope you are well. I will see you in the next lesson. Thank you very much.